Yeah, man, we're going to do Yemen. You know, Asia is such a huge continent that I thought, after all, why not? Why shouldn't I do another one on the same continent? It's on the whole other side of the continent, though. Finally. I get to talk about a country that far fewer people know much about. The research for this video took a lot more effort than the Japan and Norway ones. It's also one of those countries that's kind of all over the news, and despite them having their conflicts, there's definitely a lot of cool stuff to discuss. So with that, please join me on this West Asian excursion. Dracena cinnabari, or the dragon's blood tree, is native only to Yemen. It's very unique to the climate and has been economically important for several centuries. Because of monsoon season, it takes this umbrella shape by channeling moisture to the root system, understood to be an adaptation to the climate. Locals will use this for food for their livestock, but it also has medicinal purposes for the cows and the sheep, as long as it's not taken in excess. Besides the shape, perhaps its most important feature is the red resin. You can find this tree on an island called Socotra, a Yemeni island that is actually closer to Somalia. It's the largest of Yemen's many outlying islands lying in the Indian Ocean. 37% of its plant life does not occur anywhere else in the world, same to be said about 90% of its reptile species. Some of these reptiles include the Socotra skink, or the short-legged lizard, and the giant gecko found by the Dracena trees. There's also the aptly named worm snake that's blind, small, and worm-like in appearance, but make no mistake, it is a snake and its habits for burying make it even more difficult to see. The Hajir Massif is a mountain range that sits on its island, being its highest peak. You can access this via the valleys from the coastal town known as Hadibu, the largest town on the archipelago. Another island is the Perim Island, or Mayun in Arabic. Roughly, there's only about 26 kilometers between it and Djibouti in Africa. Alright, let's talk about some food. Salta is a traditional Yemeni dish, which is actually considered to be the national dish. It's a brothy soup made with maraq, which uses brown lamb meat as the base ingredient and is typically eaten for lunch. Rice, potatoes, scrambled eggs, vegetables, you name it, whatever you want is added for a lot of extra flavor. Khubz malawa is typically served with it, a bread that can almost be used as a utensil to scoop it. This dish is said to be over 1,000 years old. So, a lot of the music in Yemen is kind of centered around vocals, meaning instruments aren't really a common part of the songs. However, there is one called the Yemeni oud, which is used for a very distinct sound. Evidence of its use can be traced all the way back to ancient texts and was usually accompanied by other woodwind instruments or the drums. This type of musical group is common at what is known as zafat, a wedding in Yemen, with traditional melodies used in the soundtrack. The old city of Sana'a, which is Yemen's capital, is situated between two mountain valleys, and it has been inhabited for over 2,500 years. Most of the buildings are made up of rammed earth and burnt brick, which utilize a lot of geometric pattern decorations. Much of it is representative of the city's importance in the early years of Islam, being associated with civilizations of the Quran as well as the Bible. Because of preservation over different social movements and leadership through the years, visiting can very much feel like a step into the past, especially after stepping through the iconic Yemen Gate. Hey, how do you fancy we talk about the Yemen Gate? Its appearance can date back to the 17th century and is the main way in and out of the walled-in city. Close to that, you can also find the Great Mosque of Sana'a. So, according to old sources, the Great Mosque of Sana'a was constructed in the 7th century. It's said to have been constructed on the command of the Prophet Muhammad. The building style is that of stepped stone, not stepping stones, with an 80 by 60 meter courtyard and prayer halls in the north-south direction. It was also the very first mosque that we know of that was built outside of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Due to floods, it had to go through some serious renovations in the 8th century, and then of course it went through a bunch of others during the Ottoman period. Whoa, what a good time to swing into the Ottoman period a little bit. The Al-Bakiriya Ottoman Mosque dates back to the 16th century during the first Ottoman occupation of Yemen. At the time, the governor of a city called Sadaya built this in tribute to one of his friends who is buried right next to it. This structure specifically highlights Ottoman architecture patterns a lot, as the dome over the prayer hall was unknown to the people prior to this time period. Carved gypsum patterns can be found on the heavily decorated interior of the hall. This would get its first restoration in 1872 during the Second Ottoman Quest. Yemen was once divided into North and South Yemen, which can be dated back to, you guessed it, colonization. South Yemen, otherwise known as the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen, was occupied by the British until 1967. It would win its independence due to massive protests, becoming a Marxist state. North Yemen, or the Yemen Arab Republic, was ruled by the Ottomans until 1918, which became a monarchy under Imam Yahya Muhammad of the Qasimi dynasty. The two united in 1990 as just the Republic of Yemen. So, what does this mean in terms of stability? Well, due to unemployment, corruption, and a very harsh economic system, the Yemeni revolution would start in 2011. After the Saudi Arabian bombing of 2015, a group called the Houthis would lead an armed rebellion. Despite a myth describing them as Iranian-backed, people indigenous to Yemen have heavily supported this movement since they're seen as one of the nation's defenders. Iran would, however, step in for support later. Despite being a smaller geographical section, about 70% of the Yemeni population lives in this occupied region. Over the last 7 years, the US has actually targeted a bunch of Yemeni points and trained a bunch of the Saudi soldiers in the Air Force. A blockade created by the US and Saudi Navy has actually caused a famine that's been there since 2016, and it is also responsible for a cholera outbreak. Alright, bear with me with some of the pronunciation. So what exactly are the Houthis? As I said earlier, they're a rebel movement led by one Hussein Badr al-Din al-Houthi. He's a charismatic founder that called the movement Ansar Allah, or Defenders of God. In the early 2000s, Yemen was ruled by the Saleh regime, which supported the US war on terror and invasion of Iraq. Houthi and his followers saw this as supporting an imperial endeavor which basically harmed their traditions and ways of life. The Arab Spring and the economic issues mentioned earlier brought things to higher measures, and the Houthis successfully took over the capital in 2015. Currently, the former government now resides in Aden. We'll circle back to Aden later, but first let's discuss some of the other cities and what they behold. The city of Damner, not Dahmer, is known for its community gardens irrigated by drawn groundwater. Some also refer to this as a collection of disjointed villages, as it has always lacked city walls. However, you can find the fortress in the south. This is the Damner Al-Qarn Fort, going back to the 3rd century of the pre-Islamic Himyarite kingdom. Another one is Mankata, located slightly north of Damner, although is more or less a small village. I would point out that this one has several mosques, but I guess you could say that that's pretty true about a lot of the cities in Yemen. One more that we'll take a look at is the walled city of Shibam, which is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Here you can see one of the oldest examples of urban planning, as it was based on vertical construction. Tall structures stick outside of the surrounding cliff, giving it the nickname Manhattan of the Desert. The buildings are mostly made of sun-dried mud brick, reaching up to 7 stories and built in the square grid-like fashion that we all think about when we think of cities today. Now, Yemen isn't exactly known for its mountains, but that doesn't mean they don't have any, especially considering I've mentioned a few mountain valleys already. The Sarawat Mountains extend along the coast and into Saudi Arabia, which can be seen in the backdrop of the nation's capital. This includes the Jabal an-Nabi Shuyab, oh, there's no way I pronounced that right, or the Mountain of the Prophet Shuyab. Not only is it the tallest peak in the country, but also the entire Arabian Peninsula at 3,666 meters. With mountains tends to come forests, another thing that's rather sparse in Yemen and understandably has the most diverse animal populations. Because of the plant life, a lot of the country's bird species reside here. This includes the Arabian partridges as well as the rare northern bald ibis. You can also find the endangered Arabian leopard and the northernmost baboon species known as the hamadryas. On the eastern side of the country, you're going to notice a very different type of landscape. It's far less populated, mostly due to it being a lot of desert. In fact, the Rub al-Khali that makes up this part of the country is the 5th largest desert in the world. This is nicknamed the Empty Quarter for rather obvious reasons, but that doesn't mean that there isn't life or civilization out there. They are sparse, and a lot of them do reside along the coast of the Gulf of Aden. Yemen's governance is split up into districts, and like most places, the smaller the district, the more populated it is. Therefore, the further you get from the Red Sea, the larger they seem to get. Because of Yemen's arid climate and endless deserts and sands, there are actually no permanent rivers that reside in Yemen. They do, however, have little valleys of water known as wadis. Essentially, that's like a channel that by default is dry, but kind of runs like a river during the wet seasons. The largest of these would be the Wadi Mar, which runs from the Yemeni mountains into the Red Sea. This one does indeed flow for most of the year, so I guess some people could consider it a river, but again, the key word there is most. Obviously, this also helps provide a lot of vegetation. Speaking of which, date palm trees are something that you can actually find in Yemen. They reach up to 30 meters high and provide these reddish date fruits as per the name. It's also got a pretty neat looking trunk if you view it as a section cut. So when it comes to the people of Yemen, a lot of them are going to identify ethnically with the Arab population, much of it religiously following the Sunni Muslim branch. There are of course plenty of minority groups too, primarily the Egyptians and the Somali people. You might say that a lot of the conflicts in West Asia are due to these differences, however keep in mind that a lot of these borders were drawn by the British Empire that really did not consider the differences in this region. So earlier I was talking about North and South Yemen, and I think I also mentioned that the British controlled what was then the South. It was acquired as a colony in 1839 when the British captured the port of Aden. That can even be traced back to the Napoleonic Wars, as Britain stationed a garrison there to combat Napoleon's conquest of Egypt. In 1802, they signed a treaty with the Sultan of Lahej, an agricultural town situated near the coast. Being part of South Yemen, Aden would achieve its independence in 1968 due to the conflict that I mentioned before. This conflict was fought between the Flossi, or the Egyptian-backed Front for the Liberation of Occupied South Yemen, and the Marxist-oriented National Liberation Front, or the NLF. The latter would rise as victorious, and this would actually be the capital until the reunification in 1990. This is still a rather important city to Yemen today, sort of acting as a gateway between the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea. It's also a connection point between Africa and Asia. Some actually believe that the biblical figures Cain and Abel are buried somewhere here. There are several different district sub-centers, and it's actually known for its incredible infrastructure, being one of the more vibrant cities in Yemen. One of these sub-centers is Krater, which features the cisterns of Tawila. This was built not only to protect the city from flooding, but also serve the purpose of collecting rainwater. Tanks made from volcanic rocks collect the water, and nobody is certain of when they were made, but estimates have set it somewhere back to the pre-Islamic 100 BC era. When here, you may also encounter something known as the Sira Fortress, which was basically a military site dating back to the 11th century. It's a pretty popular tourist destination, and although you need to climb some pretty steep stairs for 15 minutes, you can definitely get to the top. It's still in use today and resides on the little island with the same name. Abu Muhammad al-Hassan al-Haddani, or for short just al-Hamdani, was a famous chemist, poet, astronomer, and geographer from western Amran, Yemen from the 9th to the 10th century. He was an Arab from the Banu Hamdan tribe, with his most important work being Geography of the Arabian Peninsula, detailing the physical geography and linguistic patterns of the entire peninsula. Why don't we take a look at Amran? It's a west-central city that currently serves as the capital of the governorate of the same name. Here you can find a bunch of the traditional mud houses that still stand, mostly turning it into a fortress from the time of the Sabaean kingdom. That kingdom lied on the biblical lands that was known as Sheba. This place's origin doesn't really have an exact beginning point, but estimates can take us to back somewhere around 900 BC. It would eventually fall to the Himriats in the 1st century BC. Before that kingdom gave birth to another Sabaean kingdom known as the Middle Sabaean Kingdom. So yeah, there are two different kingdoms of the same name that you've got to keep track of. Yemen adopted its current flag back when the North and South reunited. It's more or less just the Arab liberation flag, which is heavily utilized in many of the other Arab countries in some way or another. Inspiration for this dates back to the Arab nationalist theme that sparked from the Egyptian Revolution of 1952. Coffee is something that everybody in the Western world, except apparently me, seems to love, but did you know that it got its origin in Yemen? It was first brewed there in the 9th century, meant to help people stay up for later nights of religious devotion. It wouldn't be until about the 13th century that students brought it to Cairo, which eventually would bring it into the Western world. It was easy to pick up from this spot, understandably, and the word mocha is a word from this region. The border between Yemen and Oman runs almost completely straight from the tri-meeting point of Saudi Arabia, running all the way down to the Arabian Sea. There is one anomaly, however, that being a little triangular kink that's about halfway down. The purpose here is more or less to include the town of Haburut with the Oman borders, which is home to a supposedly important small circular fort. One of the greenest areas of Yemen lies near this border down towards the south, known as the Hauf Nature Reserve. Its annual rains give it tropical trees as well as a seasonal plant life and makes it suitable for a variety of reptiles and mammals. Within this coastal and mountainous region, you'll find a lot more human activity in comparison to the rest of the eastern part of the country. Yemen's education system consists of primary and secondary schooling, and although the government seems to want to prioritize this, there's not an actual huge enrollment. Primary school runs from ages 6 to 14, that being the first 9 grades. The first year of secondary school, or 10th grade, is one that everybody will take the exact same version of before 11th and 12th grade. The back half of secondary school kind of focuses more on a career that you want to pick. In terms of tertiary education, or at least the way that we might think of it in the Western world, they didn't really introduce that until the 1970s, with the first one being the University of Sana'a. It's got 21 different specialized faculties and 23 different areas of research. They actually have a girls-only branch nearby that focuses primarily on science and technology, along with several hospitals and research centers. This seems like a good time to circle back to the capital and discuss some other things, as we only really lightly touched on it earlier. The National Library of Yemen was founded in 1968. This is a very important spot which has a large collection of the country's history and culture. Next to this is the National Military Museum, which has artifacts ranging anywhere from the ancient times up until British occupation and the revolution that would follow. You can find both of these by the Tahrir Square, that being the focal point of the Houthi rebellion and the 2011 uprising protests against President Saleh. There seems to be amusement parks in just about anywhere in the world that you go, which includes the capital of Sana'a. Located near the Al Sabin Park, it's simply called Fun City. Much as you'd imagine, it has many rides that attract a lot of families, with a few playgrounds that surround it as well. There's also a bowling alley, and admission only costs about $1. Al Sabin Park is one of the most popular spots, which, as I said, is right nearby because it's known for its greenery and its big, vast spaces. It's a great place to walk around and just kind of take nature in, and you can find swimming pools as well as a football field. When I say football, I mean soccer for my American viewers. You'll notice in the backdrop of this, you can see Al Saleh Mosque, which is not only a modern one, but is the biggest mosque in the entire country. The late President Abdullah Saleh inaugurated it in 2008, and it can fit up to 44,000 people. This is also featured on the 250 rial, the Yemeni currency. The architectural style can be referred to as Himyarite, with Quranic verses inscribed on the inside, constructed with limestone and basalt stones. On the top, there are 7 domes to complement the wooden roof, and it includes an Islamic college and garden. It's also open to non-Muslims, making it a pretty popular tourist spot, although it does definitely promote moderate and modern Muslim values. Let's return a little bit to the food and look at some modern desserts. One of them is known as bint asan. Being a flaky pastry treat, it's often topped with honey and ghee with sesame and black cumin served hot. It's also common to eat this for breakfast alongside your coffee. Everybody that likes to start their day with sweets would obviously love this. Some will even eat it as a main course. I don't believe we've really touched on clothing yet. Dishdasha and futa skirts are an article of clothing that are popular among men in Yemen, usually accompanied with a jacket, although in the hotter months you might prefer a plain white shirt. Women used to wear more vibrant colors, but have lately been gravitating towards the black abaya and veil. There's also the zina, translating to beauty, which is a loose knee-length dress with long sleeves and a V-neck. There's a plant known as kat, which people in Yemen will chew on for its narcotic-like effects. The juices are said to kick off a euphoric feel of excitement and is usually used in the afternoon after work. Picture it like having a beer after a long day in the office. Allegedly, it also helps with decision making, which is always nice. The Dar al-Hajar Palace, translating to the Stone House or the Rock Plaza, is a former royal palace that's carved out of one rock only. The entire palace, one rock. Built in the 1920s, it was a summer retreat site for the then ruler Yahya Muhammad Ahmed ed-Din, who ruled until 1948. It stayed in the royal family until the 1962 revolution, and now it works as a museum, so you can go visit it. Yemen is the only republic on the entire Arabian Peninsula. The others are all monarchies. And to that end, we have reached the end of our 3rd country video. As usual, hit the comment section with any corrections or things I left out, and of course, there are probably plenty of words that I mispronounced. I'm more than happy to hear about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, or if you hated this, dislike, and feel free to check out one of my former videos. Until next time.